I'm Dr. Sarah Andries. Welcome to the Leadership Snapshot Podcast, where we discuss leadership experiences, lessons, and look behind the scenes to inspire your leadership growth. My definition of growing as a leader is that every day you become more self-aware, more aware of others, and more of an impact. You grow so that the people around you can grow as well. So congratulations on wanting to be a leader of impact. I promise to support your journey every single episode. So let's get started. My guest this afternoon is Laisha Daley, and she is, by all accounts, an overcomer, both personally and professionally. She is a master lattice climber when it comes to her career and has evolved from a staff internal auditor to an executive director of product management. She's also the founder and creator of Woman of Badassery, which we are going to talk to her more about because that is such an awesome title. And I'll include the link to her website in the notes. She serves to help young female professionals transform from stealth employees to elite badasses at work. Laisha is also involved in her local community, volunteering her time and talent at church, and serves on the Take Stock and Children's Scholarship Committee in Pinellas County, Florida for the past 15 years. She has a full circle story about her experience with Take Stock. She is married to a firefighter, and they have 2 children and a mini-goldendoodle named Rufus. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here and great to share my story with your audience.
Awesome. All right. So we've got to start with this founder and creator of Woman of Badassery. What is that about? How did you get started with that? Tell us all the details.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the genesis and the story behind Woman of Badassery, it's actually a little bit from my corporate world where I came up with the name, but it's really about empowering and elevating young female professionals. So for me, I actually, in my season of climbing the lattice at the company that I serve at, I was actually in this work session where literally all of the women, all of the influencers of the company were all kind of like co-located in an area. And so I just looked at our group and I just said, we are the zone of Women of Badassery. and they just loved it, and it just kind of stuck. And so that was really the genesis to the name and that was the inspiration behind the name. But really the mission of what I want to do with Woman of Badassery is really to help empower and elevate young female professionals who, they have aspirations of becoming a senior leader in a corporate setting or in their consulting firm or accounting firm. That's a little bit where I started. But, what does it take to actually become a part of your senior leadership team? And what are the traits, the qualities and characteristics to evolve from, where you might be today, a stealth employee aspiring to leadership to actually arriving.
I love that. So the idea, especially for me, when I think about that, actually, I just did a Facebook Live earlier today where I talked about a part of body language in meetings and how that you can make yourself invisible simply by how you're presenting yourself in a meeting. So I love that you're saying, hey, how do I help you move from being a stealth employee to being someone that is actually taking a lead?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Executive presence is definitely one of those things we talk about.
Very good. So one of the things that I talk about often is this idea that everybody sees the leader as you're coming into the world and they say, oh my gosh, they came that way. They were born like that. And so can you share with us, how did you get started? Where did you come from? And how did you get to where you are right now?
Yeah, well, I will say right off the bat, in full transparency, that I have that rags to riches kind of story. Just to put some context and some meat behind that. So I come from a Hispanic family. We moved from New York to Florida back in the mid 80s. We didn't have very much to our names. And so I had, and there was a lot of dysfunction. My father was an alcoholic, like he rotated jobs. At the time by the time I got to high school, my parents had divorced. My mom made $12,000 a year.
Wow.
$12,000 a year. So to say that I came from nothing is fact. And, but even though that was my family situation, I knew that I wanted to, I aspired to do greater things. And my parents really, even though that was, dysfunction at the time, they still instilled having an education. That education was important, right? And for me, how I viewed that, my education and getting good grades and getting scholarships and working my tail off to get as much free money as possible, so that I could leave that environment. Like for me, education was the ticket out and breaking the cycle of poverty in my family, to be quite honest. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I have this love for this scholarship program, because that was one of the first keys to my path out of that environment. So from there, I made enough grants, scholarships, basically created my own financial aid packet, with the university I went to be able to actually graduate debt-free. So for me, that was a big thing. Getting my education, getting good grades, keeping my nose clean, but being able to get my education without taking loans, that was something really important to me, even as a teenager, to be able to say that I graduated with cum laude, with honors, and absolutely no debt. So here I am, 21, going out into the real world, and I don't have that financial burden of student loans and things like that.
That's fantastic. So let me ask you this. You came from a background where it was a struggle, where finances were really tight. You go to school, you graduate with no debt, which is just very admirable considering I'm still going to pay off student loans for the rest of my life. So congratulations. That's a big accomplishment. Did you notice when you graduated where there a disconnect in skill sets? Like you had this education, but did you have those skill sets that you really needed to move into business and be a successful leader?
No, I would say there are a lot of things that I've learned in my 20-year career outside of college, that there are some intangible things that you just don't know until you're in the working environment. And so a lot of it is on the job, right? Like they will teach you the fundamentals and financial principles and, all the things you need to know book-wise, right? Like in the field, but the leadership track is a totally different ball game, right? And a lot of times what you'll cover, and when I was a business major, I was finance and management, because I figured, well, if I want to go do something in the corporate world, I should know something about business. But those softer skills, the interpersonal, how do you communicate? How do you work effectively in teams? And then, how do you go from that worker bee and how do you inflect? Right? Because they're really good at like producing the worker bees, right? But how do you inflect from a worker bee to a manager, from a manager to a leader, and a leader to a visionary, right? They don't teach that, So that's where I've definitely learned so much, in the workforce to evolve my career. And that's why I said, I even started in one field, and I have even taken different moves and navigated my career to go from audit, which is a heavy accounting finance background, into project management consulting, to program, to then product management, right? All of those things require leaps. Mm-hmm. And that's not a ladder, because for me, I thought I would start my career and I would become like a partner in some prestigious accounting firm. That wasn't my path. right? But I've used those skills and those experiences to create this beautiful tapestry of a career to then be able to say, okay, well, now where I started and where I am currently, as an executive director, my office is 3 doors down from the CEO. Okay. The kid whose mom made $12,000 to having that, access at a sweet level, that takes intentional work.
Yeah. I love that you use the word career lattice, and it was surprising to me. I did that. That's the kind of career that I've had. I've done the lattice, but the first time I heard that word was actually last week in a meeting, and a young lady sitting beside me said, "Hey, I think we need to talk more about the career lattice and not the career ladder." And I'm like, what in the heck is a lattice? So I think that is so cool that you've already said, hey, this is how I got to where I was going. I moved jobs and did some lateral where I didn't get more money or something. I got skills.
Yes. Yeah. And there were other key decisions that I made. So while I started in one firm and I spent a decade in that firm and did climb up position wise, there was a point in time where I had to make an intentional decision about my personal values and what was important to me and my family to be, right? I didn't have kids at that point, but I knew I wanted to have a family. And so I ended up making intentional choices that to some back then would have been kind of preposterous, but for me, it was the right thing to do at that time. And I continue to grow and develop. And I would say the last 7-8 years have been some really interesting stories about that journey to where I am now.
So what would you say has been the hardest and biggest leadership lesson that you had to learn?
Oh, the biggest leadership lesson, it's not all you. Your career is not necessarily all you. One of the big takeaways that I would have, especially for young professionals, is having a champion. And I make the distinction of champion versus a mentor or a boss, because your boss will be like your immediate supervisor. And yes, they are an advocate for you, but I really believe in the power of champions. Champions are going to be the ones who are in those closed door conversations when they're talking about talent assessment and succession planning and who's a high potential or a hypo. There are people, when you're not in the room, you need people of influence to be able to fight for you, to be able to champion you and to say, hey, this person has potential and here are the qualities and here's what makes them so unique. Like that, here are the unique skills that they possess that nobody else on the team has, that if we were able to develop this person, she or he has the potential to move into those senior ranks, right? And you can't always have those conversations yourself. Sometimes it is having a champion go into the map for you.
Right. So how in the heck do you get a champion?
Well, for me, there's some qualities to that. So I've been very, very blessed and very fortunate to have both male and female champions, and there have been multiple in my career. Part of it is the other person. That do they care about you as a person? Do they take the time to invest in learning about you, learning what you're passionate about, what your aspirations are? Sometimes it's somebody, who just takes the time to hear you out, and then you start to build this rapport. So I would say, seek that out, because sometimes it's not your boss, but sometimes it's another leader within your corporate structure, or within your organization or nonprofit or whatever industry you serve in. But it's not always going to be your direct manager. Sometimes it's somebody in a different position, but they have influence. Mm-hmm. And they have responsibility. And so being able to align yourselves with those types of people not in a creepy, like politically charged way, but really in an authentic way that you are building a relationship. So for me, my types of experiences have been, I was working on a critical project and I wasn't the lead project manager, but I had developed a rapport with the person, like the key sponsor for this initiative. And I was just bringing myself to the table. I was just doing my best work, trying to show up, deliver value, like doing the right things for the right reasons, calling out risks, like taking leaps of faith or being courageous in sharing not so great messages, but being able to do that in a one-on-one relationship. And by doing that, by bringing those gifts, my own gifts to the table, allowed me to have more influence. And actually it took me, one of the projects that I had, this, I started out as a single project manager working on a very small portion of the project to then ultimately leading it within a matter of months. And so being able to demonstrate that and made that person, that sponsor of the project, made her look to be a hero. She continued to bring my name up for more strategic projects. Like she was the one championing for me for other types of opportunities. And so then being able to take that relationship and then multiply that with different executives, it actually strengthened my network of champions within the firm to then be able to take on different roles and do that in a very calculated way.
That's awesome. Laisha, you said something, and you've actually said it multiple times, my gifts. Tell me about my gifts. How did you recognize what your gifts were? I actually had a coach myself this past year. So for me, I would say where I excel, like I have my whole thing about my unique gifts is actually from my coach, and because I went through a season where I said, I'm working myself to burnout, and I had to change my mindset on a lot of things. And so one of the things that she advised me to do was to journal. And she talked about your unique gifts. And so I ended up using that type of language in my journaling. So at the end of the day, I'll say, okay, instead of the thing that I did, like I really did a nice job making this PowerPoint presentation. Instead, you reframe that to say, I leveraged my unique strengths of perspective to inform the audience in this certain way, right? And this was the outcome of that. So it's really been by relationship with my own career coach to use that and to reframe my own mindset. And now every time I show up, or even how I talk to my team members, it's, you are unique. Like you bring a unique skill set, you bring a unique perspective to the table. So I'm always talking to people about their uniqueness, and I will even call out their own gifts that I see in them. So that's just how it's evolved. That's cool that you do that for people that you work with. What I've discovered is a lot of people don't see their own unique gifts, and it's hard for them to even accept a compliment. They're like, oh no, that's not, or they just brush it off. So I love that you do that for your team. That's awesome.
Yeah. And what was really interesting is I had my annual performance review with my VP. And what was really strange, to the point that I asked him, I said, did you read my journal? Because a lot of the words that he used, it was, her perspective, her perseverance, her resilience, all of that he actually used in his summary about my review. And I said, that's so interesting that you are using words, the same words that I was using in my own journal. So anyway, but there's the power in journaling and talking about how you leverage your unique gifts.
So what advice would you give a young professional who is trying to grow, is trying to move themselves to their next level in their career, and they're kind of feeling stuck?
Yeah, so actually I had this conversation with somebody last week because she said the same thing. She was in a healthcare field, and she was saying, I feel like I'm stuck, like I'm so specialized that if I were to try and do something else, do I need to go back to school or do something? And I said, listen, there's probably like 2 or 3 things that you need to do. One, which is, if you love the field that you're in, look at the industry trends. Like, don't necessarily look at what your company or your organization is doing, which is very internally driven, but look outside. So for her, I said, well, what about the healthcare industry excites you if you want to stay in that? Like, if you're staying in more of the regulatory route, could you build your own personal brand around that, right? And then we also talked about, well, what are your unique skills? What are your unique gifts that no matter if you're working in this position today, that you could leverage into a different role in the future? And so that's really what I did. I looked at what are my skills and how do I bring my skills and experiences from one position to the next? How does it build off of each other? Or if it's a totally like different field or type of position altogether, then allow yourself grace to learn. Because even as you step into leadership roles, there is this period where you don't feel as confident and you are not as competent in the role yet. So there's kind of this, X and Y axis of your competence in the role and your confidence in the work that you do. And so if you're going to make a step out into a different type of industry or position, allow yourself grace to go through that journey of learning and have that, love of learning while you're at it, because you're not going to get it right from day one, and nobody really expects perfection when you do something like that.
Wow, that's fantastic advice. Thank you so much for showing up today and sharing with us your experiences and your growth.
Thanks so much again.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Leadership Snapshot. And if you'd like to hear more podcasts that are very similar to this, please make sure you subscribe so that way you know when a new podcast comes out. All right, embrace your journey, and I'll talk to you next week.